Welcome back to Life After Trauma. Before we get into today's conversation, I want to remind you that my one-on-one guided sessions are available for anyone who is craving more support in reconnecting with themselves, their needs, their voice, and the parts of them that may have been quiet for a long time. These sessions are trauma-informed, reflective spaces where we can gently explore the patterns, stories, survival strategies, or inner questions that are coming up for you. They are not therapy, but they are a place to be witnessed, supported, and guided back towards yourself. You can find the link to book in the show notes. In today's episode, I'm joined by Kristan Swan, whose work centers on storytelling, self-knowledge, journaling, and the power of getting curious about who we really are. Kristan shares about growing up in a chaotic childhood environment and learning that invisibility became one of her strongest survival skills. Together, we explore what happens when the ways we learned to stay safe begin to keep us small. By listening to this episode, you'll walk away with a deeper understanding of how invisibility, people-pleasing, and over-responsibility can become survival strategies, insight into how old stories about who you had to be can shape your relationships, choices, and sense of self, a gentler way to think about healing, not as constantly fixing yourself, but as getting to know yourself. Simple ways creativity, curiosity, storytelling, and journaling can help you reconnect with your own voice. So, if you've ever felt like you had to stay quiet, stay small, or become who everyone else needed you to be in order to feel safe or loved, this conversation will help you begin asking, who am I beneath the roles I learned to play? Here's my conversation with Kristan Swan. Hi, Kristan. Welcome to Life After Trauma. I am so grateful to have you here.
Thank you, Jess. I am delighted to be here. This is really, you've created such a special place for sharing and for stories, which is a big part of kind of my interest.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I'm really excited for our conversation today because I deeply know and understand shrinking yourself down and
Mm,
wanting to make yourself invisible as a source of protection. You've even said that learning to be invisible, to draw the least amount of attention to yourself, and to put everyone else's needs before your own was one of your strongest survival skills. Can
yeah.
you take us back to what that looked like for you and how you came to understand that as a survival skill?
Yeah. So growing up, it was a pretty chaotic household. And one of the things I think it's interesting because very early on, my parents separated when I was about 4, and I I remember distinctly, probably a year or so later, having this awareness that my parents were human,
Mm,
right? That they were people, kind of just like everyone else, and I wanted my parents to be, and especially over the course of the years as I got to have kind of more and more friends or peers and interacting with their families and observing other ways of being, I remember at depending on my age, having pretty strong feelings about wishing that I had these, superheroes instead of these simple humans, as complex, but, simply human as we all are. And so I think that there's like coupled with that recognition, which also instilled the sense that I needed to be pretty aware of my surroundings, right? That there was that kind of part of the survival response was to gain self-reliance at a pretty early age. And specifically around the keeping myself small was, not being or the invisibility that I achieved was connected to that hypervigilance of observing the landscape, right? And my landscape felt like it was shifting at pretty rapid rate. So I not a lot of rest. And in that I'm observing these adults in my world, and I'm getting pretty good at anticipating kind of what is going to happen. So either I spent a lot of time in my room, so just even kind of physically removing myself. And I remember we moved a lot too, and many of we always lived generally in these older homes that had these closets, and a lot of times my closet would become this world, this kind of obviously I had a bedroom, I was an only child, but the closet was this truly safe
Mhm.
yeah. And not that anyone was telling me to go there. I was electing to put myself in the closet, and I usually had little things set up. A lot of times I had a record player in there and books and things to draw with. So there could be that just physically removing myself. The other way would be I talked about anticipating. So there's kind of an invisibility in being helpful,
Mhm.
right? So just kind of gliding into where there needs to be, washing dishes or clearing the plates or, putting, just kind of that being helpful thing. So it's you kind of blend into the woodwork in that way. And I think also, I mean, I grew up, there was less kind of direct attention on there was a different style of parenting that predominantly throughout most of the families that I knew. And so even if you just kind of didn't speak up and kind of kept yourself at the periphery of the room and kept yourself quiet, that alone would just you again would kind of blend into the landscape there.
Yeah, like, almost be forgotten about, but, like, I know that feeling where it's like, I want to be forgotten about. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I want you to forget that I am here, because I feel safest in that.
Right.
Mhm,
Yeah, and it's interesting because and what ended up happening is I because of that kinda outward lens that I had fine-tuned the skill of anticipating things and being hypervigilant and really, reading the room, so to speak, that doesn't allow a lot of time to get to know who you are.
mhm,
Right? And and so as a result, you can get lost, in the way that it kind of grew up with me. This behavior is being of service to others, right? Or being in service to others, and which is, especially for a woman, is a completely acceptable, if not kind of celebrated way of being.
mhm,
So there's kind of this funny thing around how it reinforces this behavior, which is probably, I know for myself, I'll say, was not really serving me that well.
yeah. No, I totally get that. And I wanted to add so a little piece of my own story
Yeah.
about the invisible piece. I remember, and it was actually when I was preparing for our episode today. This thought, this memory had not crossed my mind in years. And when I was preparing, I had the memory of after school, I would come home. It was this lovely like, time because it was right before my stepdad would get off work and come home, and so I would be able to come home and, like, live openly, freely through the house, and I would, like, sit and watch a show or whatever,
Yeah.
and then the second that I heard the car, because your brain is trained to
Mhm.
hear, like, you know the sound. You
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
visual. Then as soon as my body sensed it, it was like, everything stops, go to your bedroom. Like,
Yeah.
literally, I would run to my bedroom and I would just stay there and, like, lack of a better term, hide, right? Like, because
Right.
it's like I'm just gonna stay here in my safe space until I'm required to leave that. But yeah.
Well, and I think what you're saying there too is I so resonate with that. And I think what's I just want to tease out a little bit more is that it's not that there aren't these glimpses that you are afforded as to who you really are along the way, in this journey of invisibility and survival. There are these glimpses, but they feel so there's just this in my case, I guess this awareness that I they weren't ready to be shared with anyone, right? And so it it's interesting because I think about how that impacts, especially for me, kind of later in life, having relationships with significant others, right? And being uncomfortable or afraid, kind of showing up or showing parts of myself that I knew were really me, but again, they only had been kind of aired, so to speak, in the privacy of being alone.
Yeah. Are you, if you're okay to go here,
Yeah.
is there any specifics that you could kind of share with us? Is it like a certain like personality trait that you're talking about, or like what did you feel like you needed to hide? And I don't necessarily mean that.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a funny thing is I mean, it's not funny because it is rooted in these behaviors, but a more lightweight example would be just even food that you liked,
Mm,
right? And I remember I had several different babysitters growing up, because both my parents worked, and so at a certain age, I had to go to aftercare, and they would serve these sandwiches that were so to me so odd and so really not appealing at all. I mean, I had one babysitter who would serve like a jelly and slice of the kind of cheese that you have to unwrap, like that American cheese, like a grape jelly and that orange unwrappable cheese sandwich. And I mean, I think of now, fancy charcuterie boards where you have a little bit of fig jam and you've got this and that. So it's funny because I guess I'm kind of eating the adult version of that. But as a little kid, I was like, this is horrible. And I was the only kid that they took care of at certain times, and they'd put me in this big formal dining room, and I'd sit at the table with this sandwich, and just as slowly and slowly as I could, just work this sandwich down. And I think that even that kind of moving forward, it's like as an adult or as even a young person, I feel like I went to these extremes of either, proclaiming myself to be vegetarian or something of that nature that had a name to it, right? And kind of again, that was acceptable. But essentially, it's a way for me to kind of claim, hopefully, food that I actually like, or again, just kind of finding myself in these situations where I'm mimicking, like a boyfriend and what they like to eat. Or if I'm with a group of, earlier in middle school with, eating in the lunch circle with the other girls and, kind of being a little bit shy about things that weren't in everyone else's lunch bag, right? I wanted just exactly I wanted those cookies that they were getting, and I wanted, whatever that sandwich was, I just didn't wanna stand out in that way.
yeah. That's very interesting to me, and I I have a slightly I don't know if this is off topic, but I really wanna know if that sandwich, did you grow up feeling like a very strong aversion to those foods then, because the reason why I'm asking this is because I also had a story with a jelly sandwich. I was It was literally force-fed to me, and I
Um,
puking it up, and I did not eat any sort of jam or jelly or anything like that until I was well into my 30s. Because I was like, "No, that memory still lives in my body." Like,
oh,
no.
yeah. Well, I mean, certainly it's funny because I had another sitter who made egg salad sandwiches, which again, for kind of a kid palate, it just wasn't in my normal, the cereal that I basically was eating every morning at home. And it's interesting because it took me a long time before I realized, oh, I actually do like eggs,
Mhm.
right? And in fact, like today I in my current version of myself, it's like I will totally eat a hard-boiled egg or whatever. I mean, I like eggs. But there was a long time where I was like, no, I do not like eggs. And if I did have them, I would have them just like kind of cremated so that you basically just had no idea what it was that you were
Mm,
eating. Just was kind of the burnt
mm,
flavor. And boy, I tell you, I have never found a liking for that unwrappable cheese.
mm.
But as I mentioned, I mean, I now as an adult, I can certainly kind of pair the two together. But and I think too, I was mentioning kind of that pendulum of going kind of, you know, assuming a type of diet. But even I think of when I was in my first marriage and certainly feeling a little bit more agency over my life to a certain extent. And I mean, I would pick the oddest ways, and again, kind of keeping this food through line of expressing parts of myself. But I mean, I remember having such a strong feeling about which kind of lettuce I liked for a salad. And I mean, I look back on that and it is hysterical. I mean, it's just the kind of it's laughable is what I mean. And but that was again kind of my like baby steps of figuring out who I was. But but in a I guess what felt like a relatively safe way.
Yeah. I have 2 different thoughts happening here at the same
Yeah.
time. So,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering, so, like, you mentioned, like, the vegetarianism or, like, liking the same kinds of foods as, like, your boyfriend, and I'm wondering if part of that is maybe because you didn't know yourself, you were attaching yourself to an identity that already existed, and you were kind of like, "Okay, this is a framework that I can just easily step into because I don't know who I am." Around the food part, I'm wondering if it's also because that's something that you could actually control, was your food. So, like, 'cause, with trauma, so often we don't have control over situations, over our life, and a lot of times I feel like food is an area that does get affected just because that is typically something that we have control over.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think yes to both of your points that picking, it was whether it was vegetarianism, I mean, which I genuinely love vegetables, so it wasn't a hard stretch for me to do that. And as you said, it was this framework that had I knew people that I liked who were vegetarian, so it was kind of slipping into group that I already felt some kind of connection with or wanted to be seen as similar to. Right. And and particularly mentioning like liking what a boyfriend likes is, again, just not wanting to draw attention to being concerned that I become less lovable or appealing if I am different than
Yeah,
this person. I didn't understand that a mature relationship is not about similarity necessarily, but compatibility,
yeah.
right? And so just trying to be as similar is the way that I understood love.
Mhm. Yeah.
And but I am grateful because I think that I I know many of my friends growing up where food became a real challenge area, to your point, yes, it is that thing that you can control, right?
Mhm.
When especially when the whole rest of your existence in your world feels so unmanageable and, and out of your control.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
At what point did you begin to realize that the very things that helped you survive, like staying quiet, saying yes, or being easy to overlook, were
Yes.
no longer helping you build the life you actually wanted?
I it it probably the biggest moment that I can really pinpoint is during my first marriage. And I was married pretty young the first time, and I married someone who was older than I was, and I think again that was that, oh, I can kind of slip into this life, right? And this way of being. And I we had been married over a decade at this point and had 3 children. And I remember away at a wedding, ironically enough, for friends, and it was the first time that we had been away, just the 2 of us, after since having the kids, and the very first evening, we got into an argument, and we weren't really I mean, there had been some arguments over the summer prior, and mostly related to where we were gonna live and continue to build our life, and I felt so strongly that I wanted to stay where we were because I had these kids, and I had I had this support network. So it's interesting because kind of finding my own voice came through that process of having children and being their voice, right? And speaking to what I thought was really important for them. And again, I'm still kind of dodging whether or not I'm really speaking about myself, right? I'm still assigning myself to my children. But that first vacation alone, we started talking, and I'll never forget one of the comments that came up during the course of our argument was that I was essentially inflexible, right? That I didn't know how to compromise. And I remember I we basically kind of agreed to it was getting late and agreed to put the argument aside, and I actually went for a walk, and went to sleep, and it was and I only came back to the room when I knew that he was asleep, and that next morning I knew that there were wedding activities, so I would have some time by myself, and I was able to journal a bit and reflect on what had been said the night before, and I realized in that moment I there is that I've done nothing but compromise myself. Now,
Mhm.
he didn't necessarily ask me to do that, I had just done that, right? But I had compromised myself so much to the point where I felt like I will I will truly cease to exist
Mhm.
if I compromise any longer or anymore.
Yeah. I completely understand that feeling, and I think it comes back to what you had mentioned before, that feeling of we have to be a certain way to be lovable, right?
Yeah,
And I think that that's such a common thing that people, especially people who've experienced trauma, feel, and it's a really hard thing to, like, change your mindset and your belief on. How did you do that?
Well, it didn't happen. The awareness happened much more easily and much more quickly than the actual growing into that awareness and living into that awareness essentially, right? So I think for me there is that once I had that awareness, I did something pretty drastic, and that was I was clear that I was going to ask for a divorce. And because I felt like I was just at this point that, you know, it was kind of me or staying in this relationship that would erase me. And so that was pretty drastic. I don't necessarily, yes, that was the right choice for me. I don't want to minimize how just painful and hard that was. So in some ways the work of getting to know who I was had to get sidelined while we unwound our marriage, and we still had very little kids. So it took many, many years. And there was some space and time in that process, and I did start seeing a therapist regularly. But even still, the first therapist I ever saw was this very unusual woman. And unusual in that I had not been to therapy really. I mean, my husband and I had done some couples therapy, but I hadn't been to therapy, and I didn't expect the therapist to be like talking to me and telling me stuff to do. And I was like, is this really how this is working? And I mean, I appreciated it. I wasn't fighting it, although sometimes some of the stuff that she was saying felt so scary to me because this, it was this claiming of myself. And there were times when, I mean, part of my learning journey was, I mean, I can still think back to certain things that she said, this is what you need to do. And boy, I was too afraid to do it. And so, unfortunately, what I learned is by not doing those things, I kind of prolonged the process of learning. And I mean, patterns, and I always share with people that patterns didn't get installed, overnight. So they are not going to be, we are not going to learn how to be different overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is such a journey.
Yeah. And it's not linear, right? You have these moments where you make progress and you begin to realize that. And I think, for me, so much of the learning process is those skin knees, right? I mean, it is not this this kind of easy way to do it. It was a lot of tripping and picking myself back up. I got married again to a person that was essentially kind of repeating a pattern that it was different enough, but it wasn't really different in the ways that were meaningful. And I think that slowly over time for me, I part of me just got exhausted from, you can keep picking yourself back up. But at a certain point, you're like, do I really need to keep learning this way? Do I?
So, okay, I'm done with this. This is exhausting.
So I think there was that. And I think that there was also, enough little moments. And again, just giving myself the permission to pay attention to these moments, right? Whether it was external evidence or kind of my own inner knowing or wisdom, but recognizing just the littlest things that confirmed that actually the person that I am, not a perfect idealized version of the person I want to be, but the person I am right here, right now is lovable, is okay, is
Mm,
enough, right? And I think if you can just really slow down enough, I think that was the other thing is I spent so much time just being incredibly busy and incredibly, and again, it was all very socially acceptable because I was,
mhm.
between being a mother, a daughter, a granddaughter, business owner, it's like it's all great, right? Because you're contributing to society. But when I finally slowed down and could, kind of, it's almost like a piggy bank, right? Just taking those little moments where I recognize, okay, I'm still lovable, even though you know, didn't show up the way I thought I was supposed to show up, or I'm still this person is still my friend even though I totally forgot their birthday. I mean, just even little things like that, and you start putting those little deposits into that that piggy bank, so to speak, and realizing that these aren't one-offs, that
Mhm.
actually has kind of a bigger truth that you can then embrace.
Yeah, for sure. I wanna make one comment
Yeah.
about the contributing to society. Yes, but also you were living within the box
Oh,
that
yeah.
is the acceptable, you were well within there. So everyone's
Oh,
fine.
yeah.
The world is fine if you're in your box.
I was in my box, and I had also, part of that speaking of boxes, those early survival skills are, making these very distinct compartments, right? And being, in addition to the invisibility, we kind of adopt this shape shifting attribute, right? Where we can kind of meld ourselves into any situation. And, whether it's being the cool girlfriend who will eat, the ribs at the wi- sidewalk, rib joint with your boyfriend, or when you're
And then
really
get food
just
poisoning.
what's that?
And then get food poisoning.
Yeah, exactly. And be like, oh no, it's okay. That's the pirate price you pay for just, eating what's real. Yeah, and the whole time you just are like, could I just have like an avocado, please? The poor avocado, though, now has become stereotyped, so, oh,
Uh,
well. Well, but yeah, there is these different ways that we figure out kind of hiding from ourselves.
yeah. So one of the ideas that you speak on that really stood out to me is why self-knowledge beats self-improvement. So,
Yeah,
for someone who has spent years trying to fix themselves, what changes when they begin asking, "Who am I?" instead of "What's wrong with me?"
yeah. Well, I feel like we talked about kind of that level of weariness or exhaustion, right? And I think that when you embracing self-knowledge, it still is an incredibly interesting journey. It doesn't mean that you plant yourself in one spot and that's that, right? It's not kind of being self-satisfied. Like, don't confuse it with that. But it really becomes, in some ways, it becomes you you see yourself less as a project, right? And more as this incredible being to discover. And
Yeah.
I think that there's just so much more peace available to us in that, and also just so much more joy.
Absolutely. I had this realization, like, maybe a week ago where I was like, "Okay, wait. I love self-improvement. I love
Yes.
continuing to grow. Like, I will always do that because I want to grow and I want
Right.
to improve and I want to be the best version of myself." But then one day it hit me and I was like, "Okay, but wait. Like, at what point does wanting to be the best version of yourself become, I'm not good enough right now.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough as I am in this moment. And that's why I feel like I need to become the best version of myself." It's almost like I feel like there is a line where we have healthy growth and self improvement and all of that. And then there's a line where that's becoming another form of self rejection.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at its most destructive, it's self-rejection, and I think the more common way that I would phrase it too for most of us is it's really a distraction,
Mm.
right? It ends up being this other way to distract yourself from really all the feelings, understanding your emotions. And I think about feelings and emotions differently. So, feelings being that interpretation of an event, right, at a very conscious level, whereas that emotional landscape that we have is very much tied to our senses and our kind of our physical self. Um,
Mhm.
so it becomes this distraction from kind of being able to get this awareness and this knowledge that we have that's so I mean, I believe this to be true for this I believe this to be a universal truth, let me say. And it there I think what happens when you are operating from a place of more self-awareness and self-knowledge and really honoring that, life becomes significantly more interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said before that it's almost like you're making yourself a project, right? And I like too that you said that it could be another form of distraction and just not actually being willing to deal with what is coming up for you right in the moment. I want to touch on stories as well though, because I know that's a
Yeah.
big part of your message. So am I right in thinking the way that you described the feelings, that they kind of live in the mind, is that tied to our stories then?
A lot of times it is, yeah, that it is I mean, the way that I think about stories kind of in the simplistic in my way, I like to kind of again, that creating compartments, right? It still is with me. So I like to think of those story in three buckets essentially, right? There's those stories that we're telling ourselves, right? That can be a very loud and busy place. There are those stories that we inherit or that we acquire along the way. And then they are the stories that we choose to share with others. And if we are paying attention to the stories that we choose to share with others, the stories that I would be willing to tell to people in my early 20s are a very edited version, right? They're highly curated and edited versus the stories I'm willing to share at this moment in my life and are, appropriately so. There's a degree of vulnerability that I'm willing to lead with and that doesn't no longer frightens me. And I actually think that there could be the potential to reach others, right? Which is what we do here, hopefully. And that could be one person, right? But the storytelling aspect and kind of how that at least in my own experience assisted in the healing and the is that I'm a big journaler. I believe in journaling. I believe specifically in writing with pen to paper. I think that the physicality of it is important. I think that the you are essentially slowed down by your ability of how quickly you can put words to the page, and I think that's a good thing when we are doing reflection, and then there are different workbooks and journals that I've created that ask to kind of think about past events in addition to your current life, but I do think it's interesting as we examine our feelings around things that happened, actually even happened a day ago, 10 days ago, 10 years ago. And because I'm not saying that even though feelings are kind of that conscious reaction, I think what we can begin to understand when we reflect on how we were feeling with the value of hindsight essentially is we are able to see other pieces of the puzzle,
Mm.
right? So a lot of times we we can understand we can also I mean we can begin to view things with maybe greater empathy and compassion,
Mhm. Kind of
both.
like widen our perspective on it.
Yeah, both for ourselves and for others.
Mhm. Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned the, slowing down to journal because okay, let me tell you, Kristen, I in my mind, in my heart, I know I like journaling, but I struggle to actually do it because I'm like, "This is gonna take me forever." So
Yeah.
what I end up doing is I'll pull up, like, a voice note on my phone, and I'll just talk it out to my phone, which it is helpful. It
Yes.
is helpful, but the reason why I do that is because it's faster.
Yeah. No, so I kind of what you're describing, and this is I get this all the time with different people that I talk to about journaling, and when they find out that I've created several journals, and everybody loves the idea of it. We all know that it's good for us. We know that there are documented benefits. We know that it could be such a great thing. It's kind of like what you're describing in your relationship to written journaling is the way I feel about yoga. Like I know I love yoga. And I have had times in my life where I am very regular, and I know it's so good for me in so many different ways. I have horrible balance. It's all, and yet I'm like, I just really am I gonna go to a yoga class? Like, and it's just so funny because, based on what I do and everything, people there's it will always assume like, "Oh god, you must do yoga." And
Yeah.
I'm like, I have done yoga. I can't claim to have done it recently. And the only way that I will do yoga is if I pay money and I sign up for a class.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have to kind of pick those triggers for me, right? And if someone else is teaching it and I've said I'm going to show up, I'm very good about keeping appointments, right? And if I put down some cash money, I have no problem spending money, but I also want to get something in return for it. So I don't just like throwing money out there. So I will say one of the things that I love about my own journals that I created is that they're perfect for the reluctant journaler
Yeah.
because they are designed with prompts. There's a set of prompts, and in the spaghetti on the wall, it's the same set of prompts throughout because consistency is, I mean, kind of like other things that are good for us. The
Mhm.
consistency is where the magic happens. And they're designed to be, 10, 12 minutes, 15 if you really want it, a day. And that's
Mm,
that. Right?
okay.
And if you wanna go longer, you can go longer, but it is, less time than a lot of other things that
Mhm.
you're telling yourself that are good for you.
Right? Well, like, I mean, I tried the whole morning pages, stream of
Oh,
consciousness, and I'm like, "Oh my word, I will sit here for an hour."
no, I think the blank page is really intimidating. I mean,
Mm,
it's intimidating for people who claim that they like to write, right?
yeah,
I mean, it's
I'm
just.
a writer.
Yes, exactly. I am a writer too, and I mean, I love the artist way. I think that is just a genius. It is such a seminal work on creativity and all of that. And I love, love, love. Big shout out to the artist way. And morning pages is just tough because I mean, 3 pages handwritten is really long. And the blank page and all of that. So yeah, I feel you on that.
Well, thank you for creating such a wonderful resource for us reluctant journalers.
Yes, and even and my newer journal is heart mapping, which is actually starts with you are not using words at all. It's a continuous line drawing, and this is not to be artistic or rendering anything that's remotely resembles anything, right?
Mhm,
You're not trying to create a masterpiece. You're literally just putting pen to paper, and think of when you doodle and you're because you're on hold on a on a call, which I know you don't have to do anymore because you can push other buttons. But anyways, for all those people who remember when you had to be on hold, heart mapping is great because it starts with this continuous line drawing, and then it gives you the opportunity, if you want, to put words to paper, if you want to continue drawing, if you just want to make a list, if you want to whatever, it gives you that option too. So again, I love when I know that something works. I love creating the most simple and accessible tool that is going to yield high impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, at the end of the episode, I'm gonna get you to give us all
Yeah.
of those details,
Good.
but I do have a question to come back to the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what are some of the common stories that people carry without realizing it, especially people who learned to be invisible or overly responsible early in life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've talked a little bit about that idea of that there are specific ways that we are lovable or not lovable, right? So there's going to be, that's, I would say, very common story for all of us, right? Because there are these times when we were rejected and the way so we remember the feeling of and the way that we processed it is we assigned, like, when we did this, that I became unlovable, right? So we kind of assign a way of being, and we know that that emotional kind of that gut punch, essentially, right? That we're holding, we really don't want to feel that again. You know, we don't want to experience that emotional impact that it had on our body. So there's you know, if I do this, then I'm, lovable or I'm
Mm.
not, or I'm accepted or I'm not. So there's that piece. I think the other story that is so common is our that there are the parts of ourselves that are just so ugly or so flawed that we absolutely have to keep those hidden. And
Much.
we're too much. We are all of those things. And I would just say to that, you're right that that's not something that trot out in front of everyone. However, there are ways, and I would say journaling again is a great way to just even start
Yeah.
giving some light to some of those parts of yourself that just feel so icky, that because I think, well, the reason why I would even suggest to begin journaling about it is that it takes a lot of effort to kind of keep the lid on those things, or to just keep shoving them in the back of the closet, so to speak. So there's that. And but what you were also alluding to in terms, kind of part of our invisibility is also the hypervigilance and being so competent, right? Or so responsible. And I think one of the stories, and I really want to highlight this one because I think that this is something that I struggled with for so long, and I can still, I mean, definitely I can still fall into this behavior. Believe me, it's not completely gone, but is this sense that if I don't do it, it won't get done.
Mm.
And so we assume this responsibility that is really, in some ways, I kind of, for myself, I mean, I can see where it almost ends up being a bit of hubris, right? It's like, if, basically I'm the only person who's going to do this, right? It's just not going to get done, and it's probably not going to get done the right way. And it's all these other things, right? So of course I've got to do it. I've got to do it along with the other, like, 13,000 things that I've got to do. And yeah, if you're the person, I mean, imagine yourself in a classroom back in elementary school, right? I mean, if you're the kid who's always raising their hand to answer the question, and if the teacher chooses to only, you know, pick you, then yeah, the rest of the people in the classroom get to the point where they're like, why am I even going to raise my hand? Like, that, she's going to answer the question. So I guess I use that example to say what we do, and this can be whether in parenting or with our partners, with our friends, our family, when we are always saying, oh, I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll do it, we actually, we don't allow for anyone else to step in, and so we create this system where we're doing everything and we're really and we think that we're doing it because we're being helpful. However, I will just put it out there that oftentimes it will be more helpful if you are actually sharing the opportunity for other people to do these things.
Yeah. You're perpetuating the cycle.
Well, you're perpetuating the cycle, and and I think that sometimes it's, and again, another story that ends up getting kind of woven into all this because it's and all this stuff gets layered, right? Is your self-worth
Yeah.
can get very closely interwoven in that human doing,
Mhm.
right? We are very uncomfortable with human being.
Yep.
So yeah, so you've kind of can end up thinking I'm only, again, kind of back to that lovable, acceptable if I am the one who's always doing these things. So these are very, these all kind of reside in the same space, so to speak. And I think the other thing that I would just want to highlight on kind of giving that opportunity to others to step in is that just because you can do something, and just because, and I will even put a finer point on it and say, just because you are good at doing something doesn't mean that you have to be the one to do it.
That is something I learned the hard way. Yep.
Yeah.
Another story that I would add, because this is mine, I think, oh, and I realized this again, this was like recently. I've had so many, when you go through those phases of life where it's just like you're hit with all of these realizations just every single day, there's something new, and you're like,
Yes.
whoa.
Yes.
Yeah. So I realized that because I felt so invisible or made myself feel so invisible as a child, out of safety, out of a survival instinct, I felt safer if I was invisible. Now, as an adult, the story that runs through my head is that it's unsafe to be seen. And that has affected so many different areas of my life as an adult. I mean, the one that I'm dealing with the most right now is I have a podcast, I have
Yeah.
an online presence. And it's like, sometimes I really struggle to put stuff out there because sometimes it feels like it's not safe to be seen. And
Yeah.
I have to constantly stop and tell myself, like, you are safe. It is okay to be seen. Like, it is safe to be visible. It's okay.
Yeah. No, I really, I I thank you for bringing that up because I think that that is, again, something that I can certainly relate to, and is also, I think that it is the thing that for many years in the past, I was a business coach, and I used to observe that I think that people in some way were more afraid of success than they were of failure
Yeah.
because essentially tied to what you're saying, that the thing, if they were really going to be successful, there would be a degree of visibility,
Yeah.
right? And whereas the failure piece, like we've all failed, so that's we're back in the comfort zone. I mean, it's doesn't necessarily feel good, but it's familiar. We're back in the familiar zone. Whereas this visibility space, I mean, part of why it feels unsafe is legitimate because you are essentially going in a direction that is new,
Yeah.
right? And I think that there is a way to say this is a legitimate feeling, right? this is a real feeling. And what we also know, kind of the way that our brain is processing fear, is our brain, unfortunately, is not very good at differentiating between the fear that we feel, from being chased by
Yeah.
a, giant bear versus the fear of getting up in front of an audience and speaking or posting something online, right? I mean, we're both in the emotional response, right? Again, to talk about to differentiate between the feelings and the emotions. The emotional responses are we're still, our heart is racing, our breath is getting shallow. So to this is where it can help to kind of get back into our conscious brain and say, okay, this is not going to kill me, right? I mean, this is not a bear chasing me. Right. And also go back into that. I mean, just to use all the different imagery we've been throwing out there, go back into that piggy bank and think about that time when, I don't know, maybe you sat next to someone on an airplane and you ended up having this conversation where you said something that felt somewhat revealing, and they were like, "My gosh, right?" Like, yes, I have had that same thought or that same experience. And that little nugget that you put in the piggy bank, that is evidence that what you are saying it doesn't have to land for everyone, but there is someone out there that it's going to land for. And again, if it's just one person, that there's a ripple effect, right? That makes the world hopefully a safer place for someone else.
Yeah. No, I agree. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet that you want to talk about?
Well, I will just so that we can wrap up on the story piece. And I
Mm,
was talking about those stories that we tell ourselves, right? And then the stories that we've inherited or acquired along the way. And I think that sometimes those can get pretty muddled,
yeah.
right? So sometimes, again, kind of with the journaling or whether your meditation practice or, I love to go for a walk and not listen to something and just allow
Mhm.
my brain to kind of think. When something is coming up for you, too, I think, it's worth getting curious, right? And saying, oh gosh, is that I just was I write and and I post on my website and also on Substack, and in this week's posting that's about to go up is about this story that I had in my head about that intelligent women don't really care about clothing, right? That's not important. Like if you're really to be to be interested in clothing or how your appearance is somehow you're frivolous and you don't have intellectual rigor, right? And it's so funny because as I was writing this, I was thinking, yeah, I'm not sure where I picked that story up, but somewhere along the way I picked it up because I mean that's definitely something that I acquired, and it kind of has there was a time when it kinda became my own story,
Mm.
right? Or my own belief, part of my own belief system. So this is what we're talking about, this idea of that's not something to fix. That's something actually to get curious with and then to develop your own I mean, you ha be willing to rewrite the
Yeah.
stories that no longer serve you or that you just picked up along the way and you just didn't it was kinda like gum on your shoe, you just didn't even know where it came from, and be willing to this is where that journey of self-discovery, I feel like is actually fascinating and can be so freeing.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Yes, it's really interesting when you actually stop to think about all of the stories that we have inherited. And it's like, where the heck did that come from? Yeah, that's it is very interesting, but I love your message about choosing which stories you're going to keep and which ones are no longer serving you and you're going to let go.
Yeah. And, as long as you're still breathing and upright, you can write a new story
Yeah.
today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, the final question, the question I like to ask every guest,
Yes.
what does life after trauma mean to you?
Mm, I think that it's a sense of gratitude and also kind of a quiet confidence in that I certainly wouldn't necessarily want, I wouldn't want my children to have experienced some of the things I experienced. I wouldn't want those for other people. I am so grateful that I have been able to move forward in a way that can acknowledge the trauma and I still am in the process. It's not a done deal, but that I can acknowledge it and that I can integrate kind of the wisdom and the experience into my being in a way that doesn't have to take me out.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That was beautiful. Thank you. So,
Yeah.
where can everyone find and connect with you? Find your journals?
Find those easy to use journals. The best place is on my website, kristanswan.com.
Perfect.
And you can find me on socials too, but the website has everything.
Okay, awesome. And I will have it linked in the show notes, of course.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time today, Kristen. This has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Jess. And I really am so grateful for our time together.
Thank you. Before we close, I want to leave you with a question to sit with from today's conversation. Where in your life did invisibility once protect you? And where might it now be keeping you from being fully seen? You don't need to answer it right away. Just let the question meet you where you are, whether that's in your journal, on a walk, or in a quiet moment later today. And if this episode stirred something in you and you're wanting a little more support exploring the stories, patterns, or survival strategies you're ready to understand more deeply, I offer one on one guided sessions. These are reflective, trauma informed sessions designed to help you reconnect with yourself, your needs, your voice, and the parts of you that may have been quiet for a long time. You can find the link in the show notes. That is it for this week, my dear friends. Until next time, take care of your mind, body, and soul.